Hello there and welcome. I am so glad that you are here joining me today. This is my first Ask Me Anything, and today we are going to talk about Kink 101. And I'm so glad you're here. If you've got questions, if you've got concerns, if you've got thoughts, you are in the right place. So just to let everybody know, I have my screen pinned on me. So those of you are here, uh, you're not going to be on screen or you're not going to be on the video. Um, Although if you do choose to ask a question, your voice might be on the video. I do have some questions that people sent in advance, and I'm super excited to dive in. So, for those of you who are here on the call, you are welcome to go ahead and raise your virtual hand. I will be checking the chat from time to time, but I get very excited and I forget about that sometimes. So I will be pausing to check the chat from time to time. On that note, I just want to let you know that I am um, putting note takers in the waiting room. I just don't want to have them here. I love people and enough with the technology. So, uh, yeah. So, on that note, I'm just really excited that you are here. Whether you're here and experienced or a novice, you are in the right place. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Deborah Katz. I am a certified tantric educator and a professional dominatrix. I created the Better Sex School community for us to have adult conversations, to normalize sex and relationships and all the juicy things that happen with that, and give a place to actually talk about the things that don't go well. Because unfortunately, for most of us, we get most of our information from the culture that really is not very sex positive and honestly kind of sucks when it comes to relationship. So, if you are not a member of the Better Sex community and you are seeing this video, I invite you to come and join us. Um, so what I really want you to get about kink is that it is a very personal experience, and there are as many different ways to be kinky as there are people on the planet. And so, if you are concerned that you are not doing it right, relax, you're doing it right. So, and I also just want to say, a couple things about my philosophy um, in terms of relationships. So, first of all, there's no one right way to do relationship. If you happen to be heterosexual and monogamous and doing the sort of nuclear family thing, awesome, you're doing a great job. If you are queer, poly, and you are raising kids in a tribe, awesome. If you are a childless person who spends more time with their cat, has a better relationship with their cat than their persons, we might want to talk, but you know what? You're doing you, and so that's awesome. As long as the relationship feels good to the people who are involved and there is no harm happening, um, then you're doing a great job. So, yeah, there's no one right way to do relationship. The only way to do relationship and get it wrong is if you are harming yourself or someone else. And yeah, so as I mentioned before, I am a tantric educator and a professional dom. And one of the things that I've really learned about kink is that it's not about the ropes, the paddles, the leather. It's about so much more than that. And we will get into that in just a moment. Um, so yeah. And what I really want to say about kink is that kink, if you are good at kink, you are a step up when it comes to relationship skills. And I'll go into that more in just a moment. So tonight isn't about convincing anyone to be kinky. It's about giving you information and giving you an opportunity to get your questions answered. In a way that is non-judgmental and shame-free. So, one of the reasons that I like to teach Kink 101 is because there's so many myths. People often think that kink or BDSM, those two words are very connected, and I'll get into that more in just a moment. But the reason that I like to teach this is because, as I said, when you're good at kink or BDSM, you have a vocabulary around relationship skills that is really important. It's important to have these different skills. So, so yeah. What By the way, these are my notes over here because, as I said, I get super excited about this topic and I want to make sure that I make this time for you as valuable as possible. And I'm going to do everything I can to answer all your questions and to support you. And if there's more questions or what I am talking about sounds really, really exciting to you and you want more, I'll have an opportunity for you to work with me more towards the end. So, um, mm, 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 mm. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. Um, as I said, kink is about so much more than the accoutrement, right? You can have an amazing, sexy outfit, or you can have a great leather outfit, and you can have an incredible tool bag with all of the toys and the ropes and the paddles and the crops and the canes and all the accoutrement, and still be not a very skilled dom. Or you can have all of the, sexy lingerie and all of the collars and everything else and not be a very good submissive. I shouldn't say not be a very good, but just not have a great time doing it because they're just tools, right? When it comes down to it, kink is really at its core about trust and communication. It's about consent. It's about paying attention. It's about learning how to ask for what you want. It's learning how to negotiate and figuring out together what is going to work out, for both of you. And it's also about choosing the experiences that you want to do together, right? So, you and your partner may, and it's about different kinds of partnerships, right? So in kink, you can practice kink, and be in a long-term, 24/7 monogamous relationship. Kind of looks a little bit like a 50s marriage, but some people that really works for them. You can practice kink as with a play partner or somebody where it's like you have your vanilla life, and then from time to time you drop into scene, right? You can also have play partners where your relationship really just revolves around getting together for playtime and for scenes. Right. And then there's everything in between, right? Different ways of fitting together these relationships. And as long as they are consensual and there's agreement, That is the most important thing. Like you can practice kink in whatever way works for you. And you know, so I've talked a little bit, I've already jumped in and talked a little bit about, the dominant or the submissive. So I'm going to take a moment and slow down and actually just start with what is kink, right? Kink, so first of all, you've got kink and you've got BDSM. And BDSM is sort of the umbrella, and it is initials which stand for at least three different things. So you've got the BD, bondage and discipline, SM, sadomasochism, and then you've got, um, let's see, bondage and discipline, sadomasochism. I'm forgetting off the top of my head. So perhaps I'll come back to that. But underneath this acronym, there's dominance and submission, and anyway, I'll have to go back. But anyway, under this umbrella, you have this idea of kink, and kink again has a lot of different ways of interpreting it. What basically a kink is it's generally a sexual act or an act in general that is considered to be taboo, right? And you can have, and it's usually like one sort of thing that you are putting your attention on. So um, it could be like your kink could be uh, dominance, or your kink could be submission, or your kink could be rope play, or it could be paddling, or um, there's lots of different kinks within the umbrella. But what I want to really talk about is the way in which we play. And so, generally speaking, we have this vocabulary around how we speak, how we negotiate in this particular world. So before I go there, I just want to take a moment and tell you a little bit about my story, if that works for you. Awesome, thank you. So I started playing in the kink world back in the day when you literally found your partners in the back and on the back page in a newspaper. And it wasn't very out and open. There were several different magazines. I was lucky I came of age. I got to be born in San Francisco, so I had already started into a well, a liberal and particularly sensual, sexually liberal place. I also went to, the Renaissance Fair, and as a young teen, that is where I sort of learned a lot about relationships and where where my first boyfriends came from. And so the thing about the Renaissance Fair is that there were all sorts of different kinds of relationships. It was kind of an alternative paradise, right? There were leather relationships, there were kinky relationships, there were poly relationships, there were same-sex relationships. There were heterosexual relationships, there were monogamous relationships. So I had this opportunity to see all these different kinds of relationships and how they worked. And so that's, sort of the relational part of things. Now, during the day at the Renaissance Fair, we were playing. We were playing with improv, and we had personas, and we had costumes, and we had props. And one of the things that we particularly played with was power dynamics, right? So you might have somebody playing a lord, and then, they might be interacting with somebody who is playing a washerwoman. Or you might be having a noblewoman playing with somebody who was a stable boy, or any number of these different stories. So you take the stories, you take the costumes, you take the personas, you take all of these different things during the day, and they ended up in our bedrooms in the evening. And so, it was a very playful, very imaginatory fantasy life that we were playing out. And so that's kind of where I started, playing with power exchange and playing with these different forms of kink and BDSM. And then as I got older, um, I at some point stopped dating guys from the Renaissance Fair, and it was kind of like a shock to my system because, here it was. I was bringing all this fun, or at least I thought I was bringing all this fun to the bedroom, and my partners were kind of like shocked and appalled. And why would you want me to do that? And why would you want me to be your lord? And why would you want me to be your stable boy or give you a spanking for discipline? Or, so that came up, and as it did, it really kind of shut down the imagination. It shut down my play, and it honestly shut down the way that I interacted with my own pleasure and my own sexuality. And so I think that's really why I am so passionate about the work that I do, is because I've had the experience of being open and expansive and having fun, and then having that be shut down by shame. And so I just want to like open things up and really invite people into a shame-free space for themselves, for their partners, and for their sexuality. So fast forward, I was an intern in Washington, D.C. And while I was there, I found a class in on Craigslist. And so it was a class, it was like a beginning kink class. So I went to the class and I was like, oh my God, I have found my people. And so while I was there, I met the host of the event that I went to uh, was a Dom, and I was like, I watched him, and I was like, oh my God, I want that. So I spoke to him, and I was like, hey, I've been playing around with BDSM and with these different things. I've been reading all the books, um, and I'd really like to learn more. And so he agreed to be my mentor. And I had a very old school learning experience. And what that was is back in the day, you you didn't just buy your floggers and your things and show up and be like, oh, I'm a dom. Or if you did, people would laugh at you, because it was really much more of a community experience, right? So he was my mentor, and I started out. I would be on the receiving end of whatever it was that we were doing. And then he would talk me through what was happening. And then he would, teach me the tool or the technique. And I would practice that. And then he would find somebody, and both of us would play with them. And then he would step out and I would play solo. And then he would grade me on it. So it was a very and it was really, I mean, it was quite extensive, and it was not only the tools and not only the techniques, but like my own, how do I dom myself? How do I show up in my power, in my confidence, in my integrity? And he was very clear about, what it was to be a dom and what it was to be a sub. And so I was incredibly lucky to have had that experience of learning from the submissive side and getting to play, getting to step into more of my dominance. So, um, The upside of this is that I get, I have a wide variety of ways that I can play. And depending on who I'm playing with and depending on what we negotiate, I can be on the submissive side or the dom side. And so yeah. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it and that's how we got here. So, mm, mm, mm. Yay. So, as I said, this isn't really about uh, what's right and wrong. It's really about finding out what is right and wrong. Well, not wrong, but what works for you, right? So, there's so many different ways to play. And again, the most important thing um, is to find what works for you. Like kink is not a list of activities. It's really about consciously exploring things, right? Like power exchange or sensation or fantasy. And one of the things that I really enjoy is the ritual that comes with kink, right? You can be very formal about it, or you can be very casual. It really depends. I mean, some people love to be tied up, some people enjoy spanking. There's all sorts of different ways to do this, right? So the important thing is that everyone knows what's happening and wants to be there, right? One of the things that consent culture really came out of the BDSM world, right? It came out of the negotiations that were happening in the BDSM world. And I'll go into that a little bit more because I think that, learning how to negotiate is so important, whether you are negotiating, a date night or a kink scene or anything else. Um, I think, when I started, I thought it was going to be about the toys or the scenes or, you know, the skills or the outfits. And really what I found was that underneath it, really what my job was about was learning how to communicate, right? Starting the conversations about where are your interests? Like, what are you interested in? You know, as I said before, like BDSM has a very wide menu of things that are available, right? What are your limits? Now, I tend to like some people start with like what your limits are, right? That's one of the last questions I ask because my interest is rarely to push somebody to their limit unless what they're exploring is what they're capable of, whether it's what they're capable of receiving or giving or holding. Limits are important to discuss, but as far as I'm concerned, they are one of the last questions you ask. I'm very much about like, what are you curious about? What are you nervous about? What is the thing that might help you to feel successful here? Right? I probably dom very much like I coach. But these conversations, um, sometimes they actually last longer than the scenes do. But they're really important because they are about, for one thing, really talking about sex is one of the most shameful things that you can do. I'm just kidding. But it is one of the most, like it can be such a complicated, hard conversation to start. And that's one of the reasons that I really appreciate the kink world and the BDSM world because you start asking, what are you into? What are you curious about? What do you want more of? What's something now I will ask people what's something they don't think they'll ever do or what's something they never want to do. Um, Because there's usually a lot of energy behind that, right? When somebody says they never want something or they really push back on it, there's a lot of energy there. And what I get curious about is what's behind that. But I'm going to pause that part of the conversation because there's that's not exactly where I was wanting to go. So, you know, a lot of times from the outside, it looks like the Dom is doing everything they want to the sub. And the truth of the matter is that if they, hopefully that couple has had a conversation and they've learned where the yeses are, where the nos are. And they're both agreeing to be there. Hopefully, they are informed on what's going to happen. When I negotiate, I tend to say, I tend to let somebody know, well, actually, what I tend to do is say, see all those toys over there? Go and pick out five of them and bring them back to me. And so those five toys then become the possibility of what we may do. That doesn't mean that I'm going to do everything. It just means that that's possible, right? And honestly, I am somebody who is less about toys and more about using my body and my sub's body uh, to find that pleasure. But so, just consent is incredibly important. And consent is never an assumed yes. It's always a conversation. It's informed. Hopefully, it's enthusiastic. If it's not absolutely enthusiastic, then there's what I call the let's try it. Right. So we talk a lot in the sex positive world about yes, no, and maybe is no until that, and that can change. And I really appreciate that framework, but I also like the let's try it. So what that looks like for me is it's not really a yes, it's not really a no, but there is some aliveness to it. There's some turn on there. So it'll be a let's try it. And let's try it means that I'm really keeping an eye on, when does it become a no? When does it become a yes? And, if I'm the Dom in that situation and my sub has said, let's try it, we're going to try it for about 5 minutes and then we're going to pause and have a little bit of a conversation. And I want to say something about like you can check in with people, you can have whole conversations, consent conversations, and they can still be hot and sexy. Now, one of the things that I personally am very clear about is if something is a no, it is a no for the entire scene, right? So even if we get halfway through the scene and my sub is begging for it, they're salivating for it, they're dripping for it. There's it's still off the table until the next time we play. And I get to tease them with that. I can be like, ugh, I can see how much you want it. And you know what? It's not for today. But today we've got this and that and the other thing. So you can have a lot of fun with that. But yeah, so just to be really clear, if something is a no at the beginning of a scene, it is a no toward for the full scene. However, if something is a yes at the beginning of a scene, that yes can turn into a no. It can be revocable. You can change your mind, right? You can ask for a pause. You can ask to slow things down. You can ask completely to stop. And that goes for both sides, right? So a lot of times people only think of the sub as being the one who's going to change their mind or become a no or whatever. But the Dom has the same privileges, right? As long as you've agreed to the container and you've agreed to your yeses and your nos, again, the nos don't change, but the yeses can, and they can on both ends. And so, when we are playing in this realm, consent is incredibly important, right? That is, I would say, the biggest, across the board rule is that consent is a big part of kink and BDSM. And there's all sorts of different ways that consent play into it, but I'm just going to leave it there for now. So I want to really bring in this idea that negotiation can be sexy, right? Because people are often like, oh, well, let me rephrase that. Back in the day, I used to read a lot of tacky romance novels. And in the tacky romance novels, there is a kind of there's the rogue older man and the generally younger, innocent girl, kind of the Dom sub thing going on. And the Dom or the rogue guy knows everything. He knows how to touch her, he knows when to stop, he knows when to start, and they never have to have a conversation about it, right? So, unfortunately, that was how I thought that sexuality was going to work. Like, I didn't have to know anything, I didn't have to do anything, that my partner was going to know exactly where to touch me. He was going to know when not to touch me. He was going to know how to touch me, where to touch me, when to touch me. And we didn't ever have to have a conversation about that. Fortunately, that is not the way that this works, right? So, actually having conversations about your desires, about your fantasies, about your boundaries can be super, super sexy. It helps to feed the excitement, right? Knowing what somebody's fears are, knowing what their trauma is, and being really respectful of that when you play is super important. Um, I've encountered folks who are really about like, let's push the edges and get to all the way to your boundaries and get you to safe word. And by the way, safe word is one of our communication skills, right? So a safe word is a communication skill. It's basically a word that you use to let the Dom know where you are in terms of can we continue or do we need to stop? And so, for me, I like to use two safe words, kind of like the one safe word is mercy. And what that means is, oh, this is hot, this is sexy, but it's super on my edge. If we go too much further, I'm going to need to do something different. And then the second one is red, and red means that we are going to pause. We're gonna de-escalate a little bit. We're gonna hold some space. We're gonna check in, and then we're gonna figure out what needs to happen next. Right? It may mean that we need to stop the scene. It may mean that we need to, just reground and reorient and do something a little differently. Um, but it's really part of the game. And one thing I want to say about safe words, and I am absolutely guilty of this, is sometimes as a sub, we get into these really stoic, I need to take it, I need to please my dom. Um, and that can be really hot. And for those of us who are people pleasers and for those of us who abandon ourselves, it can be a really edgy place to be. And one of the things I love about kink is it is a great place for healing. It is a great place to reclaim our power, right? It is a great place for us to learn more about ourselves. And, one of the ways that we do that is looking at our patterns and saying, oh, I want to do something differently. So, and of course, this is where you have a conversation with your play partner or your dom, letting them know, like, I want to do something different. Just like sometimes doms, um, I mean, it can be super healing and empowering and lots of confidence building for DOMs as well. They can talk to their sub and say, hey, this is what I'm working on, right? And it is a collaborative process, right? Relationships in general are a collaborative process. And one of the most heartbreaking things I see out in the world these days is how much friction and animosity there is. Instead of seeing each other as partners and allies and, uh, people to build with, we often get into this like, enemy place. And a lot of that comes from the trauma in our background. We are also fed a lot of shit from the culture about, who is who and what is what. And that 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 doesn't do well for relationships. Oh, one of the other things that is really important in, you know, separates kink from, or BDSM from being abusive is that we take the time to negotiate, we take the time to discuss our boundaries and our desires and our wants and our needs and how we're going to communicate that to each other in scene. We also communicate our needs for aftercare. What aftercare is after we've done our scene and had our peak experience and our expansion, how do we pack each other back in our cans, right? What do we need to become grounded again? What do we need to become back into our own individual selves? Like we come together, we create this incredible experience, and then we ground back down again, and we find a way to separate. Sometimes that can be a form of ritual. For me, when I am in the dom role, one of the things I like to do is I have a collar, and when I color my sub, it is a ritual signifying that I'm stepping into taking the power, they're stepping into releasing the power. And then when we're at the end of the scene, uncoloring is a ritual sign that I am giving them back their power. And and then and then we go into aftercare, whatever that might look like. For and it's really something that's very, very important to discuss before you actually start playing, right? Because if, let's say, and it can be either the dom or the sub, but one of the two are like what they need at the end of the scene to feel complete is to be held or um, to be connected in some way, and somebody just walks off. That can be very triggering. That can make an incredibly beautiful scene rather end unpleasantly. So, there's like, do some of the more typical things are maybe a cuddle, maybe water, maybe you need some quiet, maybe you need to be left alone, or maybe you don't want to be left alone, right? None of these things are wrong. They're all very much about how the individual works. So, the last thing I want to talk about in this negotiation is I always bring in the request that should something go wrong, that we stay connected and we have a way to repair. I think this is really important because here's the dealio, here's the truth. Like shit goes wrong all the time, right? It goes wrong in relationships, it goes wrong in scene, it goes wrong, everywhere. And if we don't have the commitment and the skill to come back together and repair, right? That becomes a wedge. That becomes a wedge. It can often become a wedge, it can start as a wedge between two people. And I've seen it get really ugly within whole communities of people because the two people who something happened didn't have a way to repair. So repair is very important to me. And I have a lot of skill in that. And, if my partner doesn't have skill in that, then the invitation is for us to find someone to talk to who can help us work through it. Because, invariably, there is the possibility of something happening. And it doesn't even have to be a big something happening, right? It could be, you know, I forgot that these were your special panties and I cut them off anyway. And in my mind, I just was, not thinking about it. In your mind, I was intentionally destroying something that was important to you, right? These things happen. Now, um, hopefully none of the things that happen are physically damaging, but sometimes somebody will not be as skillful as they thought they were. So anyway, I don't want to scare you because this is a lot of fun, really. But I just wanted to put these things together for you. So I'm gonna pause here and check the chat. So awesome. Um, and I had some questions. Let me see here. Where did they go? So this is a very sexy moment. I had some questions here that folks sent in advance. And let me just see. Okay. Okay. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Invitation, does anybody want to raise their hand? Oh, okay, here's something in the chat. So the question is, um, they want to know, so the question is, how do I get involved at some local spots? So that is going to depend on where you live. Thankfully or unthankfully now we have the internet, so you can, I would start with any kind of adult shops that you have around, to see what kind of things are available. There is a website that is called FetLife, and what do I want to say? It is, it can be a great place to meet people. It can also, but please, please vet the people that you meet before you decide to meet them in person or play with them. Um, you'd be surprised what you can find on Eventbrite. Um, Also just local organizations, in terms of, looking for something called a munch, and that's MUCH, a kink munch. And this is where folks meet in a vanilla place and get to connect and talk to each other and get to play with each other. And then the second question is kind of it's a follow-up question, and that is, how do I start to ask and or pick a partner based on kink? Again, well, you're going to need to have some conversations, but there's lots of ways to start the conversation. One of the ways that I often suggest to my clients is I'll suggest that they take the erotic blueprint test and share it with someone and, invite them to take it and to have a conversation about it. Certainly, there's podcasts. If you check out the Better Sex podcast, I've got several different um, episodes about kink. Um, some munches. Um, and I mean, I think it's a lot easier today because if you've got somebody that you're dating or that you're interested in, you can always say something along the lines of like, "Hey, so there's this thing that I was listening to on a podcast, and I'm curious what you think about it." Now, I want to say this about relationship, and I want to say this about sexuality, right? So, first of all, how do I want to put this? So I've worked with several clients who are often in the position where um, they are in a relationship and their needs are not really being met around sexuality. And sometimes they're in a long-term relationship and sometimes they're in a shorter-term relationship. And a lot of times people are willing to give up their sexual desires for a stable relationship. And I want to say, of course, there are all sorts of reasons to do that. However, what I often see is that the sexuality comes out sideways, right? So if somebody is, kinky and they are not able to talk to their partner about that, that need or that desire for kink may come out sideways. It may come out, at looking at porn or, getting involved without their partner. And there's not really, this is kind of tricky because it's like on the one side, if you want to be in that relationship, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your partner to be honest about your sexuality, right? And if that is not met in that relationship, in some way, right? I've worked with, different couples who have had different kinks or different desires or different needs. And if we can talk about it, if we can play with it, there's usually a place where both parties can be satisfied. What I really, you know, what is very What I want to invite you to be incredibly careful about is trying to put your sexuality, your needs, your wants, your desires in a box so that you can be acceptable to another person, right? I would hope and I would want for you and that other person is that you are able to express who you are, that you're able to bring all of yourself to the table. And it can be really tricky when you are hiding a part of yourself, right? Because basically you are holding a part of yourself back from your relationship. And generally speaking, your partner can feel it. They may or may not know what's going on, but they can feel that distance, right? They can feel that disconnect. And that distance and that disconnect starts to become resentment, right? It could be resentment because, you are not stepping forward and getting your needs met. It could be resentment because your partner can feel that there's distance and there's something not going on. And they've noticed when you're out in public that you happen to be noticing all the women in high heels or, you're noticing all the men who are wearing leather, whatever it is, right? Our partners kind of have this sense of things. And so, as hard as it is, and as awkward as it is, I really invite you to find a way to communicate your needs, wants, and desires with your partner. Now, there are certainly situations where that feels impossible. Um, and in just about every situation I've ever encountered, there was a way to talk about things. Sometimes it got awkward for a while, but it was less awkward once it was out than it was when it was in the box. Now, the reality is things may have to change. And that, you know, that's a different story. So, didn't quite mean to go down that rabbit hole, but there you go. So, what is the first step? What is the first step to stepping into being a dom? Great question. As I said, the dom that I worked with was very much about um, learning how to hold your own energy, learning how to hold your own um, to be a can to be available to the subs needs without abandoning yourself and being able to hold what's going on and not take it personally. So, for instance, as a sub, back in my younger days as a sub, I was very much somebody that wanted a lot of containment. I wanted a lot of pressure. Um, I wanted somebody, like there. It was it was part of what helped to settle my nervous system was to have a little bit of rough play in the beginning, to know that the Dom could hold me, right? Not every not every sub needs that, not every Dom wants to play with that, but I was lucky that I found somebody that did because I really needed that to be able to settle down, to be able to trust my Dom. So yeah, so I would say the first step of stepping into your Dom is really getting more in touch with your own confidence, your own practices around how do you stay calm, how do you stay connected to your partner, to your sub when they may not seem that connected to you. So that feels like a little bit of an obscure uh, answer. Did that make sense? Awesome. So, if you've been in the better sex community for any amount of time, you know that I talk about practices. I talk about coming from the tantric lineage. I talk a lot about movement. I talk a lot about breath. I talk a lot about sound, and using those practices to become more grounded, so that when something comes at you, you're less likely to be knocked off center, right? You're less likely to be shaken up about something. And, as for me, I would say, one of the most important things in terms of, being a good dom is knowing your limits, right? Knowing your own yeses, your own nos, what works for you, what you're skilled at, what you're willing to learn. Um, my teacher was very much like, you don't do anything to somebody that you don't feel really confident in. And when he would when he would play with somebody and they had a desire or something that he wasn't skilled at, he would go get the skill, right? And I have to tell I have to tell you, like, you know, we had cat toys hanging from the ceiling and would practice with single tails to be able to have that kind of precision, right? So, it can be, if you take it that far, it can be an absolute art as well as a science. Awesome. I'm glad that that long and winding answer worked for you. So let's see. We are getting towards the end of our time here. So, I just want to get a sense of what people are getting. So, I'd love to see in the chat if you are willing. What's one thing it's one thing you heard, one thing you noticed? Communication, thank you. Cat toys, thank you. Um, Renaissance Fair, thank you. Awesome. All right. Well, it has been my pleasure to spend this time with you. If you want more, please, ask questions. If you are already part of the Better Sex community, I invite you to join me on Tuesday mornings for Tantra practice so that you can practice the skills that we've talked about in terms of the movement, the breath, and the sound, which really are the foundation, in my opinion, for just about anything and everything, particularly being a good Dom. Um, I want to just say one little thing about being a good sub. And first of all, being a good Dom or a good sub is a very individual thing. So it's really, what does that mean to you? The other thing is that I want to say, the way that I think about things is that while you are doming or topping or in control of a sub, yes, you are controlling them, but you are also ultimately practicing self-control, right? Because that is the first step to being able to control another person, is to be able to control yourself. As a sub, right? You are being asked to submit, and oftentimes we come up against things that are like, I'm going to push up against this. And you may be pushing up against, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't, there's shame around it, there's ego around it, all sorts of different things. But that place of resistance is a place that there is potential for big growth on the other side, right? Big growth on the other side. And I'll just give you a quick example. So, um, back in the day, when I was in training as a dom, I was in a sub position, and one of the things that I was responsible for was, there was a particular way that I was to greet each of the doms in the room, whether they were my dom or not. There's a way of respect. And I can remember being super, this was me in my 20s, right? I had a lot of attitude. I was like, he's not dumb enough. He's not this enough. He's not the other enough. But it was my work. It was my place of resistance, of learning how to be respectful regardless of, whatever my prejudice were or my biases were. Like, to find that respect was that place of growth for me, right? Because I kept bumping up against my ego. And, that once I was able to sort of move forward through that, it gave me a lot of freedom. And honestly, it gave me the freedom to be able to sit with people and hear their stories and be compassionate and be open, right? And be understanding and really notice like the story I was making up about that person. And so it was really, the growth of being a great sub came from popping up against the things that I was resistant against. So, anyway, yeah. So, as I was saying, please come join us, Better Sex Community. Tuesdays are our Tantra practice, and I promise you this practice will be helpful. Also, if you haven't checked out the 30 Days of Pleasure challenge, please do. Um, and what else do I want to say? Oh, and if you want to talk more about this, you are welcome to DM me. You can also go ahead and book a pleasure call. And if you go to the classroom, there is a place where you can go ahead and book a reset. So, invitation to do that. So, on that note, thank you all so very much. I really appreciate you being here. And yeah, so thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.